It's nice being here again and also sharing with other projects. It's something that we've done before with other European projects at the University of Delft, so we are very happy to be able to do that again. I'll say a few things about the GLAMURS project, about the general approach of the project, and also how this approach works, so using an example to show you how it works. First of all, this is our consortium, so we are 11 European universities and research institutes, 2 of them in the Netherlands, the University of Delft and the University of Tilburg, and then all the others here, the University of Bath, the Helmholtz Institute for Land Research, University of Technology in Norway, CIRI in Austria, the University of Magdeburg in Germany, and the University of A Coruna, which is leading the project, and the West University of Timisoara. So as you can see, we have quite a European span. This is our consortium, the people. You always have to show the people, even if normally they all look the same, the same happy researchers somewhere in Europe for a project meeting. So what is GLAMURS about? What do we do? We develop theory, models and evidence on transitions to sustainable lifestyles and the green economy. So we start from integrating theory from different disciplines and from a reconceptualization of lifestyles. I will say a bit about this more in the following minutes. What we want to do first is overcome the disciplinary silos. So we want to go beyond what's studied in economics, what's studied in psychology, what's studied in political science, and look at how these different disciplines can actually work together and contribute to a perspective on lifestyle change. We do multi-method empirical research to approach the study of sustainable lifestyles, and then we use both this integration of theory and the empirical research to model different pathways for transitions to sustainable lifestyles and also different policy options, integrated policy options that could lead to a different outcome. We constantly compare across European regions. We have different European regions involved in this project. We compare across let's say traditional lifestyles, so citizens that don't have necessarily such sustainable lifestyles, or they are positioned on a continuum between less sustainable and more sustainable lifestyles, and also we compare them with members of sustainable initiatives. So we are interested in what makes them different. And also we compare across environmentally relevant domains, different lifestyle domains. So what is this reconceptualization of lifestyles that I mentioned before? We start from seeing lifestyles not as a set of discrete behaviors, as many times is seen in certain disciplines, or discrete patterns of consumption, but we look at them as patterns of time use that take place in given location, and we consider infrastructure to be, we consider consumption, to be associated infrastructure to these patterns of time use. So we are interested in how people organize their daily life and how this organization of daily life creates opportunities or obstacles for sustainable lifestyle choices, and also how these patterns impact well-being. We're interested in seeing both. Why are we interested in seeing what impacts well-being? Because there's the inertia, part of the inertia in transitioning to sustainable lifestyles has been attributed to this idea that lifestyles or sustainable lifestyle might mean sacrifice, might mean giving up, patterns of consumption that make us experience well-being. Well, we're seeing that this is not necessarily so, because with this increased environmental impact, we are also seeing that people are complaining about increased work and spend cycles, decreased well-being, and societal alienation. The fact that we start feeling that we do not have cohesive communities, and we do not really, this promise that consumption-intensive lifestyle would lead to well-being has not really been fulfilled. A lot of research shows this. So then, what is our empirical approach? How do we approach this empirically? We want to see what the trade-offs are between this general organization of time in daily life, consumption, the associated consumption, and levels of well-being. In order to see what the barriers, as I said before, and drivers to these choices are, and focus on those that would really also promote well-being. So look at those environmental choices that reduce our carbon footprint, but at the same time enhance well-being. But we also want to see what are the factors at the meso and macro level that would lead to an upscaling of these choices, to a diffusion of these choices in sufficient strata of society, let's say. We focus on 6 lifestyle categories, which are chosen due to their environmental impact, but also the main lifestyle choice we focus on is this division between work and leisure, or out of work time in everyday life. We do analysis in 7 European regions. Yeah, these are the 7 regions here. We have a region in the Netherlands, one in Austria, one in Germany, Aberdeenshire in Scotland and in the United Kingdom, a region in Romania, a region in Italy, and a region in Spain, the region of Galicia in Spain. So as you see, we have quite a wide European span to compare these lifestyle choices. Within these regions, we also look at sustainable initiatives, as I mentioned before, a different range of sustainable initiatives. You cannot maybe see them very well here, but you can probably see them better in the following slides. So we look at sustainable initiatives of different kinds. Yeah? On the one hand, we look at domain-specific initiatives, such as those focusing on food, for example, or energy. We look at more holistic initiatives that try to promote sustainable lifestyles in a more organic fashion, such as eco-villages or transition towns. And we also look at government-initiated programs, yeah, such as the Work Smart program, so policies related to working and mobility, yeah, that also might have the impact, the result of reducing environmental impact. Yeah. As you can see, it's a wide range of initiatives that we look at in these regions. As I said before, we compared constantly between traditional lifestyles, let's call them, it's difficult to call them like that because in every region there's a wide range of lifestyles, yeah, and initiative members. Are they fundamentally different in aspirations, in desired lifestyle changes? Are they fundamentally different in their work-leisure balance, in their levels of well-being, for example? What are the determinants of sustainable lifestyle choices, both in those that choose to be part of the initiatives and in those that are not part of the initiatives but might still implement sustainable lifestyle choices in their everyday life? How do we do this? We do this through a series of combined empirical methodologies, in-depth interviews, focus groups, questionnaire surveys, and a series of backcasting workshops that will be talked about more in detail a bit later, which have this purpose of looking at the future and envisioning future alternatives. After we get all this together, yeah, after we get the results of all this research, as I said before, what we want to do is see how this can be upscaled and how these options can be diffused. So how do we see this? Normally the determinants of sustainable lifestyle choices, or any kind of lifestyle choices, tend to be complex and tend to interact among themselves. So we want to see how these interactions play out. And we do this through a series of modeling strategies. We use macroeconomic modeling, microeconomic modeling, and agent-based modeling for this purpose. Lots of modeling. And I'll show you how these work together with an example. I think that can work better. So how does this integrated approach work? From our empirical research, we find out a series of things. For example, this is an example I will use to show you how the approach works. So, when we look at time affluence, yeah, I told you that we looked at pattern of time use. And one of the things we looked at is what is the role of time affluence, of having time, and the perception, the subjective perception of having time to do the things that are important for a person. How does that influence our behavior, yeah, less or more sustainable, and how does that influence our well-being? First of all, what we find is that time affluence is predicted not so much by the objective time we have, but more by the perceived control that we have over this time and the perceived autonomy we have in organizing in organizing our time. We also find out that time affluence influences well-being, yeah, much more than material affluence. So even when we control for material affluence. When we ask people what do they desire in terms of lifestyle changes, so when they speak about what they would like spontaneously to be different in their life, yeah, what would they like to do more and what would they like to do less? We found out a series of interesting things. One of the things we find out is people want to spend more time in their local communities. They want more time with people they care about, and they want more time outside. Yeah. When we ask them about buying and consuming, about this trade-off between patterns of time use, having time and consuming, yeah, having affluence, material affluence, they normally, and a lot more of the people we interview say that they want time affluence instead of material affluence, even if they have to sacrifice the other. Yeah? So in these trade-offs, we do find that people have a preference for having time and not so much for having a certain level of material affluence. So we were slightly surprised in doing this first part of the research, it was the more exploratory part of our research, to find that all the things that people spontaneously mentioned were rather sustainable. They didn't have to do with, for example, having more things, buying more things, having the ability to do lavishing things that would ensure a higher ecological footprint. So we were surprised to see this. We saw that everything that people said implied more time affluence and implied things that were in their nature sustainable. Yeah. A lot of people spontaneously also mentioned sustainable choices as leading to well-being. Yeah, sustainable initiatives, sustainable mobility, for example, choosing to go to work or choosing to go in your private life using public transport or using the bicycle was seen as pleasurable, as time for oneself, yeah, by a lot of people. Also, sustainable food-related habits, yeah, a lot of having to do with time spent around food, time spent with others around food, time spent in initiatives around food was seen as something very pleasurable and as inducing high well-being. Also, producing your food, in the case of those that did this, was seen as inducing high well-being. Yeah? Okay, so then when we look in our surveys at what influences well-being beyond all these factors that people mention, we see that two different dimensions really stand out as important predictors of well-being. One of them is time affluence, as I said before already. Yeah? We confirmed this again on a much larger sample of 1,000 and almost 2,000 people that we had in the different regions. And also another variable stands out as very important, which is neighborhood quality. Yeah? The perception that you like your neighborhood, that you live in a neighborhood that has good quality, influences well-being. When we interview initiatives, I was telling you that we look at whether they are different, whether regional citizens with all their lifestyles, different lifestyles, whether they are different from those that join an initiative. What we see that people in initiatives say is that also being involved in initiatives and being involved in sustainable activities leads to high satisfaction, leads to high well-being, for different reasons. Yeah? Maybe we don't have so much time to go into the detailed reasons. There's lots of research behind this. They also report that there's a spillover effect in their own lives, that participating in these initiatives leads to then them making improvements, sustainable improvements in other areas of their life. When we talk to both groups about barriers to sustainable lifestyle changes, they mention again time pressure, and they mention social trends, they mention norms, government policies, and high financial costs of sustainable alternatives. Yeah? But these are things that subjectively people mention. But then we want to see what happens when we put them together. So on the one hand, when we analyze, for example, what determines such a simple lifestyle choice, which is the kind of food you purchase and whether you purchase more sustainable food, we see that in terms of psychological factors that influence this, there's a series of them that are important. On the one hand, pro-environmental identity turns out to be very important in making these choices. Pro-environmental social norms are also important, so we have this factor that's not entirely individual, yeah, it's already at a meso level that comes out as important. And aspirations, personal aspirations for the future, which can be, psychology says, they can be intrinsic or extrinsic, yeah, you can be motivated by things just because they are important to you and they are in accordance with your values, or you can have aspirations that have to do with extrinsic reasons, yeah? For example, achieving financial success or achieving popularity are some of the types of extrinsic aspirations that we might have. So, also another important thing that comes out here is that the use of sustainable initiative services, so actually making use of their services, leads to more sustainable behavior. Yeah? Leads to, for example, purchasing sustainable food. So we have all these things that influence sustainable lifestyle choices, but then how do they articulate in larger groups? Yeah? So what if there's lots of people that adopt these behaviors, but then how does this diffuse? Yeah? How do the behavior of other people influence what we do? Yeah? So we were interested in processes that lead to this diffusion. And then we do, for example, microeconomic modeling. Yeah? When we put this into a microeconomic model and we look at, for example, the fact that there might be, as we said, pro-environmental identity is important, so there might be an important group of people, a large fraction of the population, that starts adopting this pro-environmental identity. Does this automatically mean that they will start acting pro-environmentally? No. We see that there's different equilibria that can be reached, yeah, and our economists, then if you want, I can give you their emails, they can give you much more information on how this is done. But then we see that even when, one of the important results here is that even if we have a large fraction of people that have a pro-environmental identity, yeah, or variables that would suggest that they will have sustainable behavior, you can have a situation where almost nobody ends up acting pro-environmentally. This is due to the influence of other people's behavior, to the influence of social norms. We also looked at what happens when we enlarge this understanding of what brings utility, as economists call this dimension, what brings benefit, what motivates our behavior. And we see that, and what we do here is we also take into account that a lot of people now have pro-environmental identities and have pro-environmental attitudes, so they're concerned about environmental damage. What happens when you have a lot of people concerned about environmental damage? And what happens to both to their consumption and to their well-being? One of the interesting things we find here is that when you have people that are motivated and they already assume green behavior, they act pro-environmentally. If you increase the awareness of environmental damage for this particular group, which is normally done in policy, all our campaigns are saying how important environmental damage is, normally this particular group ends up acting non-environmentally, against the environment. This is because I showed you before also that one of the important factors that motivates our behavior has to do with self-efficacy, with our perceived control over the ability to produce change for our behavior. So we can see here that if we're not careful with how we define policy with the interaction of these different variables, then we end up in a situation where even those that already have green attitudes and green behavior might give it up, because something that's sometimes called learned helplessness, the idea that your own behavior doesn't have an impact, sufficient impact to be worth the effort. So you remember this. Then these are all the intrinsic factors that we care about. But then we also, when people make lifestyle choices, they're also influenced by other macroeconomic variables. Yeah, I'm getting there. I'm respecting the time. Other macroeconomic variables, so let's imagine that people really do assume different patterns of time use. That they really start transitioning to these lifestyles that have more time influence and less environmental impact. But they're also influenced, besides their psychological variables, they're influenced, for example, by macroeconomic factors, such as the secular decline in the prices of energy related to wages. What does this have as an effect? It has as an effect that people substitute time-intensive activity for energy-intensive activities. So instead of cooking your food, you go out and you get pre-prepared food, for example. And it leads to increasing consumption, which also leads to higher energy demand. So what we see with the macroeconomic modeling is that even if demand shifts, this effect might be overwhelmed by the direction of technological progress, so that we have to, when we define policy, combine demand shifts or incentives for demand shifts with incentives for changes in the direction of technological progress. Going again to the predicting of time influence, I was telling you, the fact that we need to have control over that. What influences our time influence has more to do with control over time than with actual time that we have available to ourselves. Then we see what happens, for example, when we implement a policy that has to do with flexi-time at work, so that you can, for example, arrive at work at different hours and organize your day in different ways, so enhancing that type of control. What effect that has on commuting time and CO2 emissions, for example. And we're finding out very interesting things here about how this policy might work. With all this, what we also do is we check for environmental impact. So we calculate environmental footprints, both for the regional lifestyles, for the initiative lifestyles, and also we make estimations for those scenarios for the future that I mentioned that we're building. We want to see if those scenarios are actually going to lead to less CO2 emissions. And when looking at this, what we're interested particularly in is to see what's the behavioral possibilities for footprint mitigation. We know that normally research says that income is the biggest driver of footprint. At higher incomes, we have higher environmental footprints. Well, we want to see what happens and what are the behavioral possibilities for change. We know there are behavioral possibilities for change. If sufficient people transition to sustainable lifestyles, then we are able to reduce our footprint, and we want to see where those possibilities lie. We adopt a knowledge co-production strategy, so we constantly interact with European policymakers through workshops in Brussels, with initiative members through case study exchanges, And with attending local meetings. We have a part of our work in which we actually go and attend local meetings of these initiatives, and we just engage within the ideas of the GLAMURS project, but with in a context that leaves them, that we approach them, not them coming to research all the time. We also map this process through a complicated ontology in order to provide policy recommendations. We map existing policy recommendations, and then what we do with them is we look at what new possibilities are, especially for participation, motivation, and commitment, because that's a particular area where we do not find much policy going on. And we engage with other projects. We did this during all the life of GLAMURS in different events that we had, one in Rotterdam and one at the University of A Coruna. And it's the same what we do here. We again interact with the Transit project and with the SPRI project, and we hope to have very nice exchanges. Thank you very much.